Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Operation Jericho. Blowing the horns of truth, bringing down the walls of government educational tyranny, giving the hardcore truth on public education, sharing hidden information you won't find on any other show, speaking without the PC saccharin, taking the gloves off, exposing evil agendas. Parents, you believe that you're sending your children off on that yellow school bus to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, but what are they really learning?
Animal rights trump human rights.
Global warming.
Climate change. Sexualization.
Evolution.
Let's see, sex ed, alcohol ed.
Tonight's homework, write your report on the benefits of Islamization.
Drug ed, death ed.
Anti-Christian bias.
How do you spell homosexualization?
Phys ed.
Secular humanism. Earth worship? Really?
Sustainability.
You know, like vegetarianism ed.
Equity.
Diversity.
Sex ed.
I have a friend named Ed.
Today, class, we're going to learn about social justice.
When can I learn how to read?
We know what you're thinking.
Say it ain't so.
It's time to awake, America. Your children have been values clarified, outcome-based educated, mastery educated, no child left behinded, raced to the bottom, teachers unioned, and common cored. And after all of that, they still test at the bottom of the world stage. It's time to get the federal government out of your child's mind and tyranny off your back. We'll show you the solutions, give alternatives, encourage Christians, strengthen churches. Join us. Stand in the gap. Sound the alarm. The walls are tumbling down.
Welcome, listeners, to Operation Jericho Project Radio. We're so glad you've joined us today, and I'm Christina Micas, Operation Jericho founder and your Operation Jericho Project Radio show host. And I'm joined today by my co-host and Operation Jericho Project team member, Angela Bean. Welcome, Angela.
Hey, Christina. Great to be here again today.
I know. We're going to have some fun because we're joined again by our guest today, Debbie DeGROFF, who's our child literature research expert. And we're going to do part 2 of the discussion we started last week on the kid lit books. We had so much information. There was so much, going on that we felt we really needed to continue the conversation and get all of this in so it was kind of concise and together. But before we get underway with that, we're going to discuss a little bit of the charter school movement and this thing they call school choice, vouchers, etc. We need to really kind of just touch bases on this, even though we talk about it in every show, and we're going to continue to talk about it in every show until people understand the charter movement is the Trojan horse of Common Core. But there was recently an event held by Glenn Beck in the theaters, and I guess it was called We Will Not Conform, but it was all about Common Core. And while it had some good points, it also had some drawbacks to it, and the drawbacks were the promotion of charters and school choice without explaining to you the true agenda behind them. So today, Angela and Debbie and I are going to talk about that a little bit to start with. And then we're going to go into the exciting subject of kids lit and the perversion thereof. So, welcome, my little co-host, to Operation Jericho Project Radio. Angela and Debbie.
Hello. It's great to be.
I know. Well, let's get started on this event that they had on Tuesday night about Glenn Beck. While it was well received and well attended, I understand. let's discuss some of the points about it, Angela. And
well, I had the wonderful opportunity to actually attend the event here at my local theater. Unfortunately, I was only one of about 20 individuals who were in the theater, so it was, in my opinion, a disappointing turnout of people interested in this subject. But nonetheless, Glenn Beck seemed to indicate that there were thousands of viewers nationwide, and so that's good. And a lot of new folks coming and learning about Common Core and education in general for the first time, perhaps, by attending this event. So that is a positive, and I'm going to give Glenn Beck kudos for rounding up the troops in that way. But I throughout the evening, I did take some copious notes of what was said, and really I was more concerned about what was not said during the event that I wanted to share with you. So, one thing that I want to point out, when they started the discussions, the studio audience was full of anti-Common Core activists from around the nation, and many of them I recognize because many of them I've been following and learning from over the last couple of years myself. But in the beginning of the presentation, the discussion started out by kind of explaining to the studio audiences how the states adopted these standards, and they wanted to point to the governors as being the ones responsible for adopting these standards, but they kind of let them off the hook, in my opinion, saying that it was the Obama administration with the Race to the Top funding grant and their coercion money that caused these governors of these, quote, cash-strapped states to change the education standards nationwide in their states. Well, what they did not want to point out, and I don't really think that anyone points this out very often, is that to me it doesn't matter that our states were cash-strapped and the governors were enticed by this funding. It was still illegal in most states for our governors to agree to change the education standards in our states with a stroke of the pen.
Angela, they agreed to change them many of them without consulting legislatures or anything. They just arbitrarily took it upon themselves to do this. And like you said, it doesn't matter if you're cash-strapped. It's kind of like the health care bill. They, let's pass it to see what's in it. They had no clue what they were agreeing to other than the fact they needed the money. But again, did they run it by their legislatures?
No, nobody did. And in fact, in the state of Georgia, they bypassed what is, by law, the process for changing education standards. And what I have just been very discouraged about, because our own state legislators don't seem to point this out. They want us to jump through hoops to try and get withdrawal legislation passed as if this was a legal process in the first place and needed to be repealed or withdrawn. And so that being said, I was a little discouraged that Glenn Beck doesn't point out the illegalities, and perhaps some folks probably need to be charged with the crimes, in my opinion. They did spend some time discussing the bad aspects of Common Core and kind of getting people up to speed on that. They had moms in the room and classroom teachers pointing out the fuzzy math. And one parent held up an English literature textbook that contained a chapter of required reading on a textbook that we cover on our Operation Jericho website, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. And they seem to want to point to Common Core as being responsible for pornography coming into the classroom as if it was the first time. And I think from last week's show we pretty well laid the history of that kind of thing. And so it concerns me that we're implying to the many people in the audience is that if we can just get rid of Common Core, all of this will go away. And we'll all be great and happy and wonderful education for our children again. So not pointing out that Common Core is the end game, that it's not something new, that it's a renaming of failed education policies trickling down from the federal government, I felt was a little bit of an error on their part, because it's misleading, in my opinion, for parents hearing about this for the first time. So that was a concern. But during the course of the program, we were doing interaction. We were using our iPhones and our iPads and participating in polling put out by the Glenn Beck program. And this is our modern-day thing, right, Christina, to interact in this way. So one interesting poll that I'll tell you about up front.
Let's back real quick on that one, Angela, and let's just stop there for a second and discuss what they were doing. This, based on what I've heard from you and from others, there was a lot of information gleaned from you all in the audience. Even prior to, I guess you had to sign up, give them your email address. So you give them your name, your email, and then there was a lot of, we call it interactive, but what is interactive but kind of like a focus group?
Absolutely.
So
exactly
you guys
what it was. And the very first question they asked is they wanted to know a little bit about those who are in the audience. I believe one of the questions was about our knowledge of Common Core. Were we new to it? But I don't remember that for sure, but I do recall they wanted to know our political affiliations. Were we conservatives, liberals, libertarians? How did we rate ourselves along those lines? So they wanted that information right up front. They asked us the question, which of the national politicians do you feel are the strongest in actively working against the Common Core? Now, that was not a multiple choice question. So I couldn't think of anybody personally, so I just answered none. But so they did, want to glean that information from us. So not that it was a lot of personal information, but it was probably enough to figure out who was the individuals in the audience. Right, and that seems to me kind of. In other words, there has to be a reason, that in these polling. I mean, not polling, but mining. Well, let's call it what it is. It's data mining, and. Were people put in any groups, or were they just this is all individually done? No, there was no groups. We were watching. Now on the stage with Glenn Beck, there were groups of people. His audience in the studio. They had like tables of different. In other words, 5 different sections or 4 different sections, right? Yes, they did. Yeah. I'm not sure in a presentation like this helps, but I guess it was intended they have a market as if we were working together in groups to try and solve particular issues. Right. But I'm wondering very seriously about this because it came to my attention, about the data mining part of this whole thing. And, theater-based focus group techniques was used by Mel Gibson in The Passion of the Christ. And it was also used by Rick Warren. It's called pyro marketing, when they do this through a theater-based focus group. And it's a type of marketing tool. They data mine for one event, which is then turned over to a data bank for use in a planned next event, staged operation. So it's, to basically, especially to refine the marketing message to pre-identified audiences. That's kind of what I feel like this event was partly, about, was they were doing a pyro marketing there, which was kind of interesting because it's not just about Common Core. It seems like there was an agenda behind this, the way it was being done. Well, I think in retrospect you're probably right. One of the polls that they asked, I guess, I was encouraged on one side with the results of the polls, but then on the other side was like, what? And I'll tell you what the poll was. They wanted to poll the audience, what do you feel is the best alternative to the government schools? A, charters, B, homeschooling, or C, private education. Well, I was very encouraged that 57% of the audience said homeschooling, 25% private school, and only 18% indicated charter schools. But when they went on to say, well, this is who is saying what, it looks like the liberals are supporting charter schools. It's the conservatives and the libertarians who like the homeschooling, and it's conservatives who like the private schools. That's where I got a little uncomfortable that they were really using this information we gave them previously to narrow down the results that way.
Again, it's this pyro marketing. It's figuring out who your audience is. This is no different than what they're doing to our children.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, this is data mining, pure and simple. And then they talked a little bit about, I had written to somebody and was sharing a little bit about this, and I was telling them how they kept talking about opting the children out of testing, and which really is not testing. We have to understand the difference, and we had Beverly Ekman on explaining this at great length, the difference between testing and assessments. They're not testing your child for academic standards. They're assessing your child for psychological behavioral patterns. Well,
yeah, and again, I think that's where I got a little uncomfortable, is that they, did not go far enough to explain why we needed to opt out of this. They called it testing, like you said, but why we needed to opt out of it. Why these assessments they're giving our children are so very dangerous to their privacy and the family's privacy, because they're values changing assessments. They're data collecting with them. They didn't really address the data collecting as strongly as I would have liked them to really stress.
There's worlds of difference between the meaning of assessments and the meaning of data, tests. So when they're doing that's deception, as far as I'm concerned, and those people don't know the truth, so they think they're opting their children out of testing, but they don't understand they're being psychologically tested or data mined, as we say. So they're not getting the truth, and I say words have meaning. Again, it's deception, intended or not, is still deception. It's like evil. Good or bad, it's still evil, or the lesser of is still evil. But when you think of it, it's a stage-managed event. And if we could go back and analyze some video recordings, it would be interesting to look at this through the dialectic and the Delphi technique to see what words were used proactively to evoke a reaction from the people. And how were these words subtly redefined? Were they gauging people's reaction to the words? Were they evaluating how easy or difficult it would be to fool the people, deceive them? How were they using words to play with people's feelings, emotions, and anger, hot buttons? Was any of that stuff going on?
Well, what is interesting is they started laying out the action plans for citizens towards the end of the show. And, part of their action plan, which is admirable, was to encourage everybody in the audience to go on and do your own research so that you know what you are talking about when you go to your legislators to address the Common Core issue. But at the same time, they turned around and they said to the audience, they actually warned us, that when talking to our legislators, there are certain things we should not mention to them when talking about Common Core. And, for instance, we should not point out to them that this is a communist education model. So there you have it. Now,
this reminds me of your plight.
They're censoring us, right?
Well, this reminds me of what you...
I'm sitting in this room, and he's saying there are tens of thousands of people nationwide participating. Well, we only become referenced as a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist when we're standing alone. When there are 10,000 of us standing together and pointing out that this is the Soviet model of education with workforce training, school to work, then we're no longer can be ostracized or have our character assassinated as being someone that's just a kook. And so that bothered me a little bit, considering how many times Glenn Beck has been referred to as a conspiracy theorist. That now he's telling us, look, you don't want to be called a conspiracy theorist, just be quiet about certain aspects of Common Core. And we've talked about this before, how our legislators, our state legislators, have told us don't mention the United Nations, don't mention the Muslim Brotherhood, don't mention socialism and communism, because these are all taboo subjects with your legislators. They will shut their door on you. So that was a little disconcerting.
Well, Angela, what happened in Georgia? You know, this reminds me of what happened there in your state when you were doing we were talking about Agenda 21 and Common Core and all this, the UNESCO and the things behind it and Communist Core, and you were told basically, do not say that. And that's not, you weren't told that by your legislators. You were told that by some groups that were anti-Common Core, supposedly, and I believe one of them was American Principles Project and others, that told you to basically sit down and shut up and don't talk about that.
Well, absolutely. And Concerned Women of America is another active group working against the Common Core, and we were told as citizen activists to stay on their message, because any mention of these affiliations with the Common Core was going to thwart our efforts to pass withdrawal legislation. Well, guess what? Staying on their message did not get parents inspired or concerned, because fuzzy math is something they're used to. We've had fuzzy math in our classrooms for 10 or 12 years, or much longer, actually. We've had revisionist history. We've had, sex ed and drug ed and health ed and everything else, in our classrooms. So parents obviously aren't going to get upset about that. And so when we were told last night by Glenn Beck's group, stay on their message, don't talk about these things, that was a little disconcerting to me again. And so they just want us to continue on as we have been continuing. Here are their talking points. Get organized. Get yourself some T-shirts. Get to know your local school boards and your school superintendents. Show up at those meetings. Show up at the state capitol. Well, this is what we've been doing for 2 or 3 years. This is wasting our time. It's wasting our money. It's wasting our energies where we could be putting forward in other initiatives that would actually help rescue our children out of the grips of the government. And I think that's what they want us to stay distracted, in my opinion.
Well, what I found confusing, too, Angela, was they were saying you're not going to get first of all, opt your kids out of the testing. They kept saying testing, even though these aren't tests. They're assessments. And listeners realize these are assessments, not tests. But they were saying opt your children out. If everybody opts your kids out of these so-called testing, then we win. On the flip side, we've got to save the public schools. And then on the next breath is you're not going to get rid of Common Core. You can't get rid of it. Well, the whole thing, it's like you're speaking, the old saying, you speak with forked tongue, because it doesn't make sense. You're not going to get rid of Common Core. You're opting your kids out of a test. Okay, so fine. That's one test, and you're going to cut off the head of the beast with this one thing? When you're in the flip side, you're saying you cannot get rid of Common Core. And then they're saying we've got to save our public schools. The whole thing makes no sense. They're trying to keep you in the same vein. And what was interesting was this comment that I got, that Common Core, this anti-Common Core agenda is an attempt to strip away all opposition and stage manage the launching or the marketing of the next stage of education reform, which we all know will be onerous and horrible. The public will be sold a bill of goods, and the people going to these staged events are being used by the powers that be to ascertain and evaluate the potential areas of conflict, identify the laggards, and control the opposition. Now, keep in mind what we talked about yesterday, Angela and Debbie, about where the money came from and how this how money, so-called conservative establishment, heavy big money was behind this event. So, there's something to this that, to me, it's like something smells in River City, and we just can't quite put our finger on it yet, because it doesn't make sense what they're telling people.
Another part of the discussion of this program was they had some of our activists there that were, proudly saying, like, for instance, North Carolina has passed legislation, Indiana has passed legislation to withdraw from the standards, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Missouri,
But we know that's not true.
That is interesting, is that when they didn't read the legislation of these states that have passed these bills.
Angela, your phone's cutting out.
Uh-huh.
Your phone keeps cutting out. We're getting about the other.
Is this better now?
Your phone. Okay. Well, talk and I'll see.
Okay. So these states that are passing these withdrawal legislations, most of them are no longer doing a full ban on the standards. Instead, they're setting up appointed study committees or councils to review the standards in order to keep what's good and toss out what's bad. So this is very similar to what the state of Georgia's law evolved to. We were no longer a full-out ban on the Common Core. We evolved to a piece of legislation that was going to set up an unelected council appointed primarily by the governor, who loves the standards, and they were going to review the standards. And I sensed that we would discover that, just like Indiana discovered, that when this appointed council got through with their review, their new state standards would look just like Common Core. But they would have a new name: Indiana State Standards, Georgia State Standards. And unfortunately, even in Wisconsin, they're working in the same kind of legislation, but there was one state that said, Common Core Standards is getting a bad name. Oklahoma said the words Common Core in Oklahoma are now so divisive that they have become a distraction that interferes with our mission of providing the best education possible. That was Governor Mary Fallon's comment. Well, here in Georgia, I've spoken to some teachers who are already being given their marching orders. Don't call them Common Core anymore. We're going to come up with a different name, but you're not allowed to refer to them as Common Core Standards. So, see, even at the very local level, we're not changing the standards, we're just rebranding them so that parents are deceived. And that's my opinion on that.
Well, and that's exactly what's happening. Is that my daughter was just here, I was telling you guys, and she's swearing to me Idaho has its own standards. No, we don't have, this. And I made her pull up what comes from their school, and right there, Idaho Core Standards. Well, if you're using core standards, that's the key. That's the buzzword, just like Mary Fallon in Oklahoma and the rest of them. They're still doing core standards. That is still the Common Core. So
and they clearly
just a lie.
Their legislation
Again,
is seen as that the standards are to be rigorous and aligned to college and career readiness.
Right, they keep using the buzzwords, and then in that same statement from their school, it said that we're part of Smarter Balanced Consortium. Well, what is that? That's Common Core. So you're not changing standards. You're using, call it Delphi, call it the dialectic, call it whatever. Words matter. And they're using deceptiveness to make you believe they've gotten rid of something when, in fact, they've gotten rid of nothing. It makes me go back to Mike Huckabee when he said, gathered all the governors together behind closed doors and said they're wise to us. We've got to change the name. Don't get rid of the standards. Just change the name. Rebrand it.
And that's exactly right. And what was not pointed out last night, I don't think in a real clear message was that these standards were promoted and developed by the National Governors Association. They were the major push behind it. They started decades ago talking about nationalizing education standards. And so to think that the governors were just tricked into taking this money and they had no idea what they were getting into, I think is a little disingenuous. They knew exactly what they were getting into. This was not blindly accepting some money for a cash-strapped state. They knew what they were agreeing to. And so I'm not giving them any kind of a permission to be excused from an error in judgment that the Glenn Beck program seemed to want to give them last night, because I'm not excusing a single one of them, and I'm not excusing a single one of the governors in the states that came into office after the previous administration accepted them, those that are not working to get out of the standards. And across the board, not many of them are very genuine about it, in my opinion, when they allow these laws to be passed, setting up another unelected council. This is the destruction of our representative form of government every time an unelected council is set up that makes decisions for we the people, but they're not accountable to the people if they make bad decisions. So I don't give the governors any slack on this issue whatsoever.
I don't either, and I'm in complete agreement because, again, to me this was a lot of deception. Just enough of the truth. You know, I keep equating it to the Bible where, you know, Satan had Jesus out in the wilderness, you know, giving him the word, but just enough deception in there, you know, and just enough twisting of it to try to deceive. And, of course, you know, the Lord wasn't deceived, but nonetheless, we as people are. And there was a lot of deception going on here. So we know that we've been data mined. We know that. We know that they did not tell the whole truth about the governors, the whole situation, whether it's, you know, that poor governors just had to take the money. No, they were in on this, as Angela just pointed out. And so we're trying to take this apart, not to eviscerate them or their program or whatever, you know, because they have some good points, but on the flip side, we need to point out deception where deception exists. And so one of the other deceptions, let's get into this because we know that now we picked several things out that were kind of disturbing about this whole event, and not telling the whole truth to the parents. And how are the parents going to be able to truly make educated decisions if they're leading them in the wrong direction? And then we pick up on charters, because I know that was a big push. And Hillsdale College, Dr. Terrence Moore was there. So tell us a little bit about that, Angela, how that whole charter thing went, and because we know that Hillsdale sold out to the charter movement. Hillsdale used to be solid conservative, Hillsdale College, and now they've got their own little charter school thing going because of the money. You got to understand this is all about money. Follow the money. And so anyway,
I will start off by I have a lot of respect for Dr. Terrence Moore. He wrote the book, The Story Killers, which was just an outstanding book that laid out the agenda by changing from the classics of literature to these informational texts in our children's classroom. And he has some outstanding videos that we've got posted on our website. I have a lot of respect and admiration for him. What I was concerned about with him being on the program is that Hillsdale College is now sponsoring what they call the classical K-12 charters. Now, when you read the mission statement of Hillsdale College, they say that they are a strong defender of America's founding Judeo-Christian principles and the Constitution. So, unfortunately, I find that to be a problem for me because, as we have learned from many people who've studied the charter school movement, including my idol whistleblower, Charlotte Thompson Iserby, who wrote the article, The Charter School Trap. Charter schools, while they are touted and promoted by those pushing them as being an education system aligned to like you would get from a private Christian school, the laws in most states do not allow these charter schools to behave as if they were a private Christian school, because even in the Georgia's Board of Education website, on their webpage addressing charter schools, it clearly says these are public schools funded with public tax dollars, and they are secular schools. They must comply with Georgia's education performance standards and the accountability system. And so there is no way that a charter school is going to be able to go outside that big box that's been created for our traditional public schools and teach all of the principles and strong academic curriculum that they say that they will be teaching, because their hands will be tied due to the many agreements that we've made with Race to the Top funding grants, these models of turnaround schools. But what we're seeing in Georgia is that the charter schools that were established in the past few years, 2 years ago when we passed an amendment to our Constitution to allow this unelected council of individuals appointed primarily by the governor to tell my local school district that we will be putting a charter school in your district even though you have opposed it. That is a destruction of our representative form of government that was allowed to proceed through and pushed by the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. So we have laws in place now in Georgia that will not allow Hillsdale College's charter schools to teach what they claim they want to teach. In fact, when you review the websites of the two academies that Hillsdale's putting in Georgia, they clearly state on their website that this is the case, even though Dr. Terrence Moore stated on the Glenn Beck Show that they would be teaching this Judeo-Christian classical education and all of this. So let me just tell you a little bit about what the website, what these schools are teaching in Georgia. Now, it'll depend on the charter school laws in other states as what they can do and not do, but I'm just going to have to share with you in Georgia. They are teaching a curriculum called Core Knowledge. And when you go to the Core Knowledge website, they again reinforce this false notion that Common Core state standards are not a curriculum. And it says, the Core Knowledge Foundation supports the Common Core State Standards Initiative and is committed to helping ensure their successful implementation in schools nationwide. Now, knowing that Hillsdale College is using the Core Knowledge, and we have a statement like this from the Core Knowledge Foundation, does that give us any comfort that these charter schools, as touted, will be giving our children a different education than what's getting in the traditional K-12 schools? Yes. And so, what we need to just be very careful to remember with these charter school and the movement of charter schools is to ask the right questions. And on our Operation Jericho Project website, when you go to the link at the top of our webpage that discusses the school choice movement, you will learn a lot more about charter schools, the questions you need to ask when a charter school petitioner comes to your local school board, and what you need to know about what they can and cannot do. But do check your state laws on charter schools, and you'll probably find that they're very similar to Georgia, because all these charter school laws are coming down from the American Legislative Exchange Council, who are big promoters of not only Common Core, but the charter school movement. And as Charlotte Thompson-Iserby points out, the end game goal is to destroy all of our locally controlled schools through our elected school boards and replace it with one national school board that will be in charge of charter schools. And we see that coming with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act moving through Congress, that it will destroy local control and state control as the state takes that money and agrees to let the federal government run our charter schools.
Right, and that's basically called regionalism, listeners, because what Angela was saying, yes, they're going to have one central place, but again, they're going to have regions. And what regions do is eliminate all elected representation. So you'll have no school boards, you'll have no superintendents, you'll have no this, no that. None of that will exist. You will have nobody to go to. The ultimate goal, when I talk about the agenda, and I usually mention this every week, the ultimate goal is to remove parental authority and give authority over the children to the state. So that is the ultimate goal of this whole charter movement, because it will redefine education completely. Education, no, we don't even call it education, it's indoctrination. The children are not being educated. And don't think because it's a charter they're going to get better education, because once this is implemented, it's still school to work. It's the Soviet labor system. It has nothing to do with education. It has everything to do with the corporate takeover of education, and the kids are human resources. They're calling them human resources and human capital already. So understand, this is not a good thing. And so they will be doing this through regionalism. So, and charters are coming on at just an alarming rate. Schools you'll see starting to shut down. They'll be starting to get rid of tenured teachers and bring in these teachers that are already indoctrinated, because ultimately, in the end goal, you don't need teachers. You're going to have facilitators or what do you call them, technical assistants. And the more that we pick up on the verbiage and what they're using, the more they change it. So understand, this continues to change. The buzzwords continue to change, but you've got to know and study yourself approved to understand what the buzzwords are so that you can follow this, because that's how they're tricking everybody. Just enough truth that you think, oh, that's right, but it's deception. So bear that in mind. And charters are the Trojan horse of Common Core. This will be the complete dismantling of our education system of parental rights. And that's the main point of charter schools. So, and it will all be, as Angela stated, this is the ALEC. We call it ALEC, the American Legislative and Exchange Council. It was huge in Indiana in getting that whole thing done. Did you see what I just sent you from Mary, Angela?
I did. That is a very eye-opening. Mary Black, who is one of the founders of Freedom Project Education, which is alternative to government-run schools, sent us an email pointing out that the appointed commission in Indiana was headed by Suji Shin of West End, who partnered to make the PBIS data tracking program, and they affiliated with the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium. So you see how all of these, when you're talking about appointed commissions, don't you ever believe that they're going to be full of people that are like-minded and are there to represent we the people. They're going to be appointed by individuals who want to control every aspect of our lives and will fall lockstep in with the governors or the legislators who are appointing them. And that's why appointed commissions are so dangerous. We've got to get back to a system of elected representation. That's what our founding fathers gave us, and they're quickly trying to move us away from that. It's a very dangerous movement.
But this just shows you, when you hear Indiana going, oh, we opted out. No, we don't have it. It's just deception. It's lies. Every state that is stepping forward right now saying they got out of it, look deeply into it, because you're going to find the buzzwords, rigorous, core this. You'll find them still attached to one of these consortiums, Smarter Balance, and what's the other one, Angela?
PARCC.
PARC. Yes, thank you. So yeah, it's something we really, really, really have to stay on top of all of this, because there's so much deception and lies. It's not just Benghazi and everything else. We're talking education here. They are deceiving and lying to the parents to get to this ultimate agenda. And then basically it winds up the New World Order. I know you think we're all crazy when we mention that, but that's exactly where they're headed. And unfortunately, it's a moneymaker. So they have sacrificed the children for the altar of money. And that's the bottom line.
Well, and absolutely. And Bill Gates has invested billions of dollars into this initiative because of the technology that's going to be required in the classrooms to control our children. But he's now saying, because it's getting such a bad press, okay, all you states, let's just take a rest a little bit for a couple of years and let it all settle down. Well, he's not giving it up. When he shut down his business called In Bloom, which was collecting all of this data, I don't believe in a minute that Bill Gates made a decision to shut down a part of the machine to collect our data and track our children. It is just part of the deception, and In Bloom is either getting renamed or it will reopen again in a couple of years when all of this kind of settles in and people forget about it and go on about their business. But we can't. We've got to rescue our children out of the system. They will keep at it. And so
we have to remember, Angela, Bill Gates signed that agreement in 2004 with UNESCO. That is the organization out of the United Nations that controls education. So again,
meant to be the World School Board. Exactly.
It's the World School Board, and Gates signed an agreement with UNESCO in 2004. So he's committed to this. So don't listen to the words that come up. Jeb Bush, Mike Huckabee, all these people you look at and say, oh, they're conservatives. No, they're not. They're selling out your children, and they're selling out the United States of America, and they're selling out our representative form of government for a new world order. And ultimately, that's the bottom line. So we just, and we're going to talk about charters and this every week. I mean, pretty much we get into this every week because it is such a vital issue. And there's so many lies and deception. This is why we say Operation Jericho Project is about truth. You can believe it, you can not believe it, but we are going to tell you the truth. And that's what we're committed to, because this is God's radio show, and we've dedicated it to the Lord. So truth is the only thing you're going to get here, whether you like to hear it or not. And so now, speaking of truth, let's get into some more truth about how they're lying to parents about children's literature and the perversion of our children's literature books and what's happened to that. And we're going to do part 2 today with Debbie DeGROFF, who's our Operation Jericho Project researcher for 28 years. And Debbie, just as a wealth of knowledge on this. I mean, we could do 50 shows and never run out of information. So, Debbie, come on in and let's talk now about what they've done to how they perverted the kids' lit books.
Well, it was very, very interesting listening to your all's conversation, and I made a couple of notes that kind of parallel with what I see in the kids' lit, and one of them is the undermining of parental authority. That's something that I have tracked for quite a number of years, and I really think that flows into the it takes a village that Hillary was talking about. But we could actually do a whole show just on how parental authority is dealt with, or the lack thereof, in kids' books. Also, it's easier to control people who are technically uneducated, and as they're uneducated, we keep them entertained. And so with that, today I'm going to talk about my first topic on kids' books today is going to be reluctant readers. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but I had a column from a would-be author had written in and asked, what exactly does a reluctant reader mean? And she said that they are intelligent children or teens who are interested in reading, but they lack good reading skills. They haven't been taught to read properly. Some kids simply have no interest in reading and are at risk of falling behind, and other kids have specific learning problems that impede their ability and desire to read, and the most challenging kid is one with excellent skills but has no interest in books or reading. So they have a whole category and in books that are suggested for reluctant readers to try to whet their appetite to make them want to become readers. So today, I'm actually going to deal with ones that the American Library Association, their YASA, has picked as quick picks for reluctant readers. And I want to show you that normally these are written on lower reading levels. They're usually fast-paced. They usually do not have a lot of pages. And, they hook them in quite bluntly, with sex or violence. And interestingly, let's see if I can find my site here. I clocked in Accelerated Reader yesterday and found out that they have 659 books that are reluctant reader suggestions from second grade reading level clear up through 6.9 or 7.9, I'm sorry. And these are very low reading levels, and I'm going to start with one of them. And when I finish with the illustration from this book, I think you can figure out why these books are supposed to involve these reluctant readers. This one is about Manda and Hope, and she says, I called her the kissing slut because she had made out with 31 different guys by her 15th birthday, and that's when she decided it was time to move on to manual stimulation, so we christened her Linda Hand Amanda. When she turned 16, well, let's just say she earned the title the headmaster. Manda calls herself an extreme virgin and intends on keeping it that way until she finds someone who meets all of her criteria. 6 feet tall, drives a Jeep, lean, etc. She knows this is a tall order, especially here, so she settles for messing with one Mr. Wrong after another until Mr. Right comes along. Now, this is what's supposed to whet their appetite for reading. And so I dare say when I finish with a few of these illustrations from this book, you'll see why they keep reading books by these same authors. The next part is Scotty is the most self-censoring foul mouth I know. Like every jock, he worships Opie and Anthony the afternoon misogynistic masterminds between Whip 'em Out Wednesdays. This is in which female motorists are encouraged to titty flash any male driver with a wow sign on his car, and guess what's in my pants? A female caller rubs a phone against her most private of areas, and male contestants try to guess whether she's spotting a Brillo, a triangle, a Hitler, etc. Now, I'm going to stop there. Mothers and fathers do not expect that when their children go to a library that the books that their children are selecting have these types of contents in them. In fact, when you read the description of that book, you would have no idea of any of this. It says, when her best friend moves away, hyper-observant 16-year-old Jessica is devastated. A fish out of water at school and a stranger at home, she feels more lost than ever now that the only person with whom she could really communicate has gone. So we're being misled by these descriptions. Angela brought up last week a very good illustration of a teacher explaining to her about reading Marley and Me to her students. And so I looked online for all the descriptions, and you find nothing as to what the teacher found when she actually started reading that book aloud to the children. So,
what was the name of the book that you were just reading excerpts from?
Sloppy First. She also has Charming Seconds, etc. It's a whole series. They're the Jessica Darling series. Now, there are passages in there. You know, what I'm trying to say to the parents is most of the little comments that stick with the children in the kids' books are not even necessary.
Right.
You have to ask yourself why they even write these things in. For example, on page 18, there is a little comment, and she says, Lisa has been holding a grudge against me ever since I said that I don't like sleeping over at her house because her father doesn't wear any underwear underneath his bathrobe and sits with his legs spread wide apart at breakfast. Now, was that necessary?
Is that in that same book, Debbie?
In the same book. I am going to belabor this book just for a little while. This book is not an exception, but I really would like to make this point to parents. that you cannot examine a book just by its book cover or just because of the description on Amazon or Accelerated Reader. Another page on 79, it says, Rob asked, hi. She said yes, then took it back when she found out from Sarah that he was suspended for jerking off into a Milky Way wrapper during study hall last year. If anyone has the guts to diss the captain of the Uberjock triumvirate on account of his sexually deviant behavior, it's Hi. Another page, she says, I'm just going to say F for the F word. F, okay. It's just an IQ. F, I just lit that cigarette, griped her friend. What the F, asked the third, murdering me with her black-lined eyes. Why didn't you give the effing code? I apologized for getting to say it's cool as I walked in. The code, the effing code. You better be effing sorry, said Camel Toe. You made me waste a effing cigarette. I wasn't sure where wasting an effing cigarette fell on the hoochie brawling scale, but I wasn't about to find out.
You know, my question is, why is this stuff even in a book? Period. Why? Why is it? This is not in the pornography section, and this is actually in our children's literature books. I don't even understand the need to write this stuff.
Or why is it published?
Why is it published? It's disgusting.
Why is it published? Why is it not edited out? That can only tell you that this is what the publishing companies and the editors are looking for.
By design.
Because these are not your obscure books. These are your popular books.
And again, Debbie, you pointed out the book was published in 2001.
Don't keep trying to talk. Anyway,
the book was published in 2001, so that was 13 years ago, long before Common Core started blatantly putting pornography into our children's textbooks. And I think that's part of what we're trying to point out here, that this has been a part of our schools and our children's lives for a long time, and getting rid of Common Core will not get rid of these books influencing our children and their morals and their values. But just wanted to point that out.
Well, we can go back to Avis Hill. We can go back to what's her name, Miller. Anyway, you know, the ones that were fighting this again, and Betty in 2000. This is the same thing. If they can, hear it, then I can. I mean, if they can read it, I can hear it. This is no different. This has been going on. We know since the 70s for sure.
And
so again, and Core is just another name. Remember, Common Core is just another name of the rebranding of everything that started way back when, outcome-based, mastery, all of these different names they've had, No Child Left Behind, Goals 2000, whatever you want to call them. Common Core is just another name. So don't think it's a different thing. It's the same agenda with a different name. So this has been going on for a long, long time. So go ahead, Debbie.
Well, you brought up some good points. We really have to take a look at this, and we have to see that 30 years ago, let's say 30 years ago, would this have been accepted? So somehow we've had a generation that's perspectives, that their viewpoints have been changed. And this is just one of the areas that has been very effective in doing this. Now, this book, those weren't isolated passages. I could go on and on and on. She deals with one of her friends is going to go to the prom. It's a boy. And he's talking about going with some girl that wants to de-virginize him. And so, the passage goes on, and he says, you make it sound like I'm going to F the S out of her. Well, aren't you? And the boy says, I told you I don't like her. And here's what the girl says. Mutual like isn't always a prerequisite for effing the blank out of someone. Now, when you read their descriptions, number one, sometimes you'll find that they'll say, well, this is reality. Really? Or they will use the argument and they'll say, well, we're just showing kids so that they won't do these things. Now, I'm sorry, but that flies in the face of all logic.
Exactly.
Exactly. So, yeah, I want to go on to...
Go ahead, Debbie. This is just, it's kind of like I'm sitting here going, oh, my God. But go ahead.
I don't like having to deal with this, but I have done this for so long, and parents do not realize what is really inside of a book. If I say it's bad, they think it has SH in it. Right. Okay? They do not realize the content of kids' books. These are not unusual books. These are common. Now, another book that is one of the YASA picks for reluctant readers. Remember, we're talking about kids that don't read much. So we want them to be reading books. So we write them at very low reading levels, and we get them hooked on either sex or violence. Now, this particular one is by Lauren Miracle. It's called TTYL. It's the first book that was written completely in instant messaging form. So YOU, will be the letter U, etc., and TTYL means talk to you later. This one is written on a 3rd grade, 8th month reading level, but of course it's for upper grade kids. Now I'm going to read you 2 sexual passages out of this book. There's a lot more, but I want to go on to how they deal with Christianity after that. Okay, here's one passage. She says, Lee has a blog on girl.com, and supposedly she posted an entire entry about how Susie needs to shave her pubes. Isn't that awful? Mad Maddie, my brother's new girlfriend doesn't shave her pits or her pubes. He brought her to this family party at Lake Lanier last weekend, and she wore a bikini. That's sick. Mad Maddie. It was basically like she had a pelt. The Pops, that's her dad, pulled me aside and said in this really loud whisper, guess she forgot to mow the lawn, huh? Snow Angel, I could never not shave. That's just gross. But even if I did have a pubic hair problem, which I do not, you and Zoe would still love me, right? Then a few pages later, there's another example. These are all early in the book. Snow Angel. Well, she said that Margaret ejaculates. Maddie. What? Snow Angel. Well, actually, she said she squirts when she comes. And then she was like, blankety blank. I can't believe I told you. You've got to swear not to tell, Terry. You've got to swear. And Snow Angel responds and says, some girls really do, though. I read it in Our Bodies, Ourself, another sex book for kids. Okay.
And these are in the libraries. These are in the libraries for your children.
These are library books, and Lauren Miracle is a very popular writer. Many of her books are in the middle school section. This particular one is in upper grade. What I really want to bring to your attention, though, and I spent till very late last night putting all these together for you, but I want to show you how she deals with Christianity. And it's very interesting because I had read Violet in Bloom, I think that was probably for middle graders, a few years ago, and one of the girls has 2 lesbian moms, and one of the other friends is a Muslim. And, of course, she dealt with those in a very, very favorable manner. But I want you to see how she deals with Christianity. Okay, so Zoe Girl, remember this is all emailing, instant messaging. Mr. H expects us to read a book a week. Can you believe that? Snow Angel, did he stare at your boobs? Who, Mr. H? Maddie and I had him for journalism last year, and he was always staring at some girl's boobs, mostly Maddie's. He was always reading her shirts. Ooh. So watch out. He makes a big deal of being all Christian, but what that means is that he's majorly sexually repressed, whereas I, on the other hand, am not sexually repressed at all. Okay, now, another one. How was your meeting with Mr. H? It was good. It was kind of cool, actually, because after we talked about my paper, we talked about religion and stuff. And this continues through the whole book. They're weaving the threads of each one of these girls that text each other, their lives. So you see that Zoe is a very naive girl, and she doesn't realize that he is hitting on her. So he starts taking her to church and to the Bible fellowship groups, the Wellspring. And so you see what the perspective is of Christianity. She'll say, and Mr. H talked about Christianity a little, how he's sure God has a plan for him, and he invited her to Wellspring, then he invited her to church because it was a long ways away, and of course he picked her up. And, they would have this long drive where he would talk to her. And then they mock, you remember the Footprints poem? So she mocks that in here. And let me see, there's 2 more excerpts. At the end, he entices her to come to the Kravitz's house because he is house sitting for them, and they have a hot tub. And he entices her to come, but in the end, she doesn't really want to come, and she's scared. So at the very end, her friends come to her rescue, and so she didn't have to be seduced by him, okay? There is nothing of turning him into the board. This is a 24-year-old teacher, and she's a 15-year-old girl. I want to make one more point about the Christianity. This is Lauren Miracle's points of view. The Maddie is supposed to be the more wayward girl, the more streetwise, and she's always kind of picking on Zoe. And so she told her that she started looking up religious things because of, what Zoe was going through. And she found a site called Jesus.com. Well, when Zoe looks it up, it is basically what she calls a porn site, and Maddie calls it a dating service. And the man's name is Jesus, and you can sign up to take baths or showers with him and get your picture with him. See, we blaspheme Christ all the way through this.
My God.
Yes. And you see, I find the same. I have line after line after line. I could read to make this point to you, and you would really, really understand what they do with Christianity. But this is through book after book. This isn't one isolated book.
Right.
Now, what do you think your children are going to think about Christianity when every Christian introduced in a book is a pervert?
What was that really simple book? Was it God Went to Beauty School?
Yes, God Went to Beauty School, where she says that, Lucy was God's cousin, and they used to play baseball together, and God's still waiting for him to come home.
And that's Lucifer.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what, in other words, they're making so light of it to the kids. They're going, oh, well, that's, Lucy, God's waiting for Lucifer to come home, and, that's Lucifer, and Lucifer. And then you'll try to tell the kids that's bad, and they'll go, oh, no, he's a good guy. God's waiting for him. I mean, this is the perversion.
And it also makes the child think that you can do anything, that he or she can do anything, and that someday they're going to sprout wings and be an angel, which is what I find that most of the kids think today. And so throughout this book, there was nothing about a relationship with Christ. One interesting sentence. Zoe says, he also told me how he used to have all these headbanger CDs, but he dumped them when he realized he was a Christian. It was just like one day you woke up and rolled out of bed and said, oh, my goodness, I just figured it out. I'm a Christian.
And how in the world do you get to be a Christian based on this?
Okay, and I before I forget, I want to bring out one thing. When they said the Jesus.com site, of course, I looked that up. you know that every child is going to look it up because the one child identified it as a porn site, right? Mm-hmm. It is actually the Metropolitan Community Church, which is the homosexual church site. Now, I have no way of knowing how many years they've had that site. I don't know whether they already had that site when she wrote this book and she knew it, or if she just made it up. I have no way of knowing. Wow. But I thought that was a very interesting fact.
And that was Jesus.com?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Huh. And so when I had read this, quite a while ago, I had marked that in my book. And I looked it up again yesterday to see, if I was right. And yes, that is exactly what it is.
Yeah, it redirects to a church URL, the Metropolitan Community Churches. So that is interesting.
Yes. Yes. So, I'm not standing here saying that she knew that when she did that. I'm just stating it as a fact. I thought that was rather curious.
Yeah. Coincidence. Interesting.
Yes, there's a lot of coincidence in these. All right, the next one, I'm not going to go into the details since we dealt with it last week, was the Nicole Hasler Sex, a Book for Teens for 15 and up. And this is the one where I gave the illustrations of the fisting and the anal sex from her sex book that was endorsed by Jocelyn Elders. And I just thought it would be interesting for you to know that that one is also a YASA quick pick for reluctant readers.
Wow.
Yeah. That one was interesting.
Now, again, listeners, I want you to understand, YASA is Young Adult Library Services Association, a division of the American Library Association. So understand, again, the American Library Association is fully behind all of these books. Go ahead, Debbie.
Yes. All right. Now, the next one I don't enjoy reading, but these books are so popular, I really need to deal with them. Ellen Hopkins has written quite a few books, including Tricks, where I talked about the lesbian teenage prostitutes last week. She's written Glass and Crank and Perfect and Tilt and Identical, Impulse, Burned, a whole bunch of them. But Crank, Glass, Impulse, Perfect, Tilt, and Identical are all YASA quick picks for reluctant readers. And these are written, of course, they're all for upper grades, and they're written from a third grade, fifth-month reading level all the way up to a fourth grade, third-month reading level. And I am going to read a two-page excerpt from one of these books. There's 600 and some pages on average, and so you think that's a really, really tough book, but they're written on poetry form, and they actually only take just a few short hours to read. This one is titled, it's all in poetry form, Mom Was Gone Again. Can't exactly remember why, only that we didn't expect her to come home until very late. It was dark in our room, velvety black. Someone had closed the curtain. Kaylee was scared. I tried to tell her not to worry, but just then Daddy burst through the door. I closed my eyes tight and made myself no more than a shadow. Something about him was different. I didn't want that something to find me. I cracked my eyes just a slit as he sat on Kaylee's bed, pulled her into his lap. He smelled of brute and wild turkey, his peculiar potpourri. I love you so much, my little flower. Daddy needs something from my girl, my sweet rose. Will you give it to me? I wanted to be his little flower, would have given my daddy anything. What did he want from Kaylee? She laid her head on his chest and said, What? I want you to see something that proves how much I love you. This is only for you, Kaylee girl. He lifted her gently, sat her down on the bed beside him. Then he opened up the snaps on the fly of his flannel pajamas. It stood up, stiff as a stalagmite. See how much Daddy loves you? Show me you love me, too. Touch it. He closed her hand around it. I know it sounds bad, but I wanted to touch it, too. I didn't know what it meant, only that it made Daddy happy, and I wanted to make him happy too. That's right, his voice rocked in rhythm with his body. Oh, yes, my Kaylee loves me, my little flower. Well, I guess you can figure out what this lengthy book was all about. Now, in the end, if you're sitting here saying that this is really protecting all these children that have experienced incest in this world, in the end, there really was no punishment. Her father was a judge. She was the one that was going to be in counseling forever, and when it was finally exposed, he didn't get any kind of jail time. I'm not quite certain what message and how this helped children, but Ellen Hopkins, the author, on her site, she was questioned, what do you think about people who want to censor your books? I mean, anybody that objects to a passage, they call a censor, so I use the term loosely. She says, I think they're misinformed at best and dangerous at worst. Please refer to my live journal blogs for more information. Well, I think Christina and Angela are a little bit on the speechless side at present.
You know, the first time in my life, Debbie, I'm a little bit speechless today, but you go right ahead, honey, because the listeners need to hear this. If you can make me speechless, you know. And I've heard a lot of this, but today, for some reason, it's just there's more. And so it's just disgusting. I just find it all so terribly disgusting, but so important that we share this information.
Well, you know, Christina, what keeps flashing through my mind is that what we're teaching our children is such a danger to, in so many aspects, because I've heard stories of parents who have been turned into the Department of Family and Children's Services because they dared punish their child for misbehaving. And so while, I want our nation's children to be aware that if they are really and truly sexually abused or battered or beaten, that there is...
Oh, Angela went away. But, no, this is true. See, this is what some of this is reminding me of. She kind of touched on it a little bit, is this is child pornography. This is... you're talking about a child and a parent. Now, that father should be arrested. In a normal society, he would be arrested because this is battery by a parent of a child. This is abuse, sexual abuse by a parent of a child. To allow this stuff to happen and to even encourage it. And yet we're treating it, not only are we treating it as if it's not, but so lightly that it's coming through our schools into their little minds.
Well, I don't know. I have so many mixed emotions when I'm reading that, because they tell you that this is supposed to make children understand that they're not alone. Is that comforting?
No, because how do you understand you're not alone? You look at this and you think, well, what's wrong with me? I should get into this. This is something I should be into if I want to be up with my peers. They're not looking at it as if I shouldn't do this.
Well, I'm not sure that it would make a child, I won't go that far to say this would make a child want to participate in incest. I do not think that the book did that at all. I'm just saying I have read so much, and the line that we're always fed is that the children need books that of characters that have experienced what they've experienced. Many years ago, a college that was near to us received a lot of grant money, and it was in the paper, and they were going to have a new reading program to teach parents to read to their children. So I called about it to see what they were going to do and how they were going to teach the parents to read. And, of course, I found out through a long process when she wouldn't answer me until I finally met with her in her office that they really weren't teaching the parents to read. The grant money paid for particular books that had been written with an accompanying cassette tape at the time that the parent would memorize so that they would be able to read those books that they had memorized to their children. Now, how does that tie with that? Well, first of all, I did bring up the point, and I said, well, what happens when the child brings them a book that they haven't memorized yet? But, and that one wasn't taken very well either. But she said the important thing about these books is they were all about dysfunctional families.
Mm-hmm.
And she was so proud of that. And I said, I said, wouldn't it be better to have a strong family unit that these kids would aspire to? And she thought I was from another planet. And this, going back to the Hopkins book, sometimes you probably wonder, well, how do I happenstance upon some of these books? Well, in my paper, in my state, this isn't a good thing to do, but many times they will basically advertise foster children like you would advertise the puppies from the Humane Society. And so they will put the kids' likes and dislikes. And there was a teenage girl in there, and I was reading what she had written, and she said that she loved reading these Ellen Hopkins books, and I had never heard of them. So I went and I checked out, all of them that my library had, and that's how I discovered the Ellen Hopkins books. But you have a girl who was probably not in a good situation, and, how do you think she would have reacted to more books like this?
Angela, you're back on, honey. Can you hear us?
I can. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to say your thought? You kind of got cut off in midstream. If you wanted to go back at all.
The thing about it is that really I think parents need to be concerned about is why are our schools trying to influence our children with these kind of messages? I understand the need to want to make sure that children know if they are ever sexually abused or physically abused in any way that they can get to a point where they can go to a safe place, but this just seems to be giving mixed messages to me.
Oh, me too. It's to me, it's kind of a child that is already mixed up a little bit. It could lead them into incest. It could lead them into other areas because maybe they're psychologically not correct or messed up from whatever's going on in their home life or, around them in their environment. This could lead to that kind of stuff to make, my daddy will love me if I do this, and I could see this leading children into that. I could.
Well, I don't know how it will affect a child, but I do fear that sometimes the child, when you look at example after example in these books of not only incest but all of the other things, that they do get this concept that these modes of behavior are normal.
Right.
And they are not normal, but we are treating them. And, of course, Planned Parenthood, adds to that, the sex education they have, of course, the TV, the movies, the video games, all those different things just reinforce that. Last week,
understand that Planned Parenthood with the American Library Association as well. They go hand in hand these days. So it's often endorsed by the American Library Association and Planned Parenthood, or books come directly through that are Planned Parenthood that are endorsed by the American Library. So they're one and the same now. And you know what Planned Parenthood represents, which is ultimately abortion and just, that kind of thing. So let's stay focused on who the players are here. Go ahead.
Okay, last week we talked about Nick and Nora's infinite playlist with the 275 F words. And I just want to mention to you that it, too, is a YASA quick pick for reluctant readers. Freak Show the book about the drag queen had written, okay, that is written for upper grades, but a fourth grade second month reading level, which does contain, homosexual acts, even a homosexual rape in that book. That is a quick pick also for reluctant readers. And then I have another one that I want to read as soon as you... Okay. Let me see here. Not finding it. I'm sorry. There was one called Boy to Boy.
Mm-hmm.
And, now let me flip. I haven't found it yet. Okay.
Boy Meets Boy by Levison?
Yes.
Okay, Boy Meets.
Yeah, okay. I'm in the... one more. I'm going to go on. I'll tell you what. I'll skip that until I find it, and I'm going to deal with the Wide Awake. And this one is a little bit lengthier, but this one really shows you where we are today. Remember that David Levison is actually an editor at Scholastic. And this book was published in 2006. It's on a 5th grade, 8th month reading level, and it is not a quick pick for reluctant readers. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So there was an author that I hadn't heard of at the time, and her name is Amy Reed, and I was reading her site where she was discussing this book. And she had gone to a conference in which David Levison had spoken. And so she wrote down her notes, and this she had written in 2011. And she writes, "He made me cry like a baby. It happened while he was reading a sex scene between two boys from his book Wide Awake. It was so beautifully and tenderly written. The characters, remember these characters are kids, were so much in love and in such control of their bodies. They were safe, physically and emotionally. It was not just a perfect gay sex scene. It was a perfect sex scene, period. I kept thinking of the kids who might find this book, might see this representation of what love can feel like, what sex with someone you love can feel like. I want kids to read this, queer and straight. I want this to be the kind of sex they hope for. I kept thinking about how this could be the light that gives a queer kid hope." Now, that's written by another young adult writer, okay? So, you know me. My next line was, so what was this scene that made Amy Reed cry like a baby? And that she wanted this to be the kind of sex that the kids hope for. So I'm going to read it.
Okay.
2 boys, high school boys. The first time, it was slow, then fast, then slow, then fast. And it was safe in so many more ways than one. It was closeness, not because he was inside me, but because of what it meant. It was so intense and so much ours. And once it started, we weren't going to stop. Sometimes we would talk through it, and other times all my thoughts would form in one-word flashes. Yes, wait, me, there, you, breathe, grasp, sweat, yes, over, lower, more, slow, yes, now. I loved being naked with him. Now, let's remember, she thinks that every child should read this. I loved being naked with him, watching him, when he lost control, when he let go and let me take him. I loved when my whole body felt a part of it, when I would grasp and glide and press without having to think about it. We knew Jimmy's parents were out until at least 10. We knew we had the house to ourselves. We slammed into each other as soon as the door was closed, stumbling to his room between maid kisses, kicking off our shoes, pulling off each other's shirts, unbuckling our belts, sliding off our pants, then wrestling into bed, our underwear, the thinnest barrier, soon shed. This wasn't want, this was need. I was pinning him against the mattress, and it continues. It continues quite a few more lines.
Hey,
but I'm going to stop there.
what level is this written on?
Okay, this, of course, is for upper grades, but it is written on a 5th grade, 8-month reading level.
So listeners, I want you to digest what Debbie just said. This book is for upper grades. I wouldn't want my upper grade kid reading it, but nonetheless.
That's right.
This is for upper grades, but it's written on a 5th grade level, which means any child at that level could read this book.
That is exactly right.
I want to drive that point home. That's why we talk about what level these books are written on, because they may say, oh, it's for your upper grades or 17-year-olds or whatever. No, 5th graders can get a hold of these books as well and quickly be able to understand them, because that's how dumbed down our 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds are, because these are written on a 5th grade level.
Well,
anyway.
And yeah, I'll tell you, there are a lot of adults reading these.
I can imagine.
Lots of adults that read these books.
Well, they're pornography. So if you're into porn, I guess this would be, child porn. This would be child porn.
Okay, you brought up a very legitimate point. One thing we know about pornography is it is addictive. If most of these books that are written on the graphic sex level are 3rd to 5th grade reading level, of course the children are going to read lots of books, but they're never going to progress over that level, and they're going to be very easily controlled.
It's astonishing.
Yes, it is astonishing, and we have to look at it. My point that I want to make to parents is, for years and years and years, even when a parent knew the content of a book because their child put something in front of you, parents kept their mouth shut because they were so ridiculed and mocked for ever opening their mouth about a book. And we don't have the same problem as the TV program. We have no problem ranting about it. But when it comes to a book, we're so afraid that we're going to be called a book censor or a book burner. And you look at all of these books that they say have been banned or challenged. They advertise them the week that they have book banning week, usually in October. All the libraries have a whole table with all of these books available to the kids. In fact, they're promoting them that week. So I dare say that they're not banned when they're so readily available. You see how we've been manipulated?
And we remember last week we talked on our show with a parent that was trying to speak out against these kind of books that are required reading, and he was accused by another individual in the school board meeting of trying to be a book censor or burn the books. And so this is the language they use to cause parents to shut up and sit down. I think that's why it's important that perhaps as parents are listening to this program and they're realizing, oh my gosh, I need to speak out against this. Go find other parents and form your little group and go to the library and ask to see the books as a group. Don't try to take on the machine as an individual, and really start asking the questions. Demand to go to your child's library. Most school districts should allow parents to be able to review the books in your school libraries. They do allow you to review the textbooks. I don't see why library books would be off limits. But using Debbie's book list suggestion, take that list and just go see if these books are in your school. If, again, you find that your school has no books that you find concerning, please call the show and let us know, because the realtors in your school district will be very excited to see parents come to your schools when they flee the other school districts, because I don't believe that it's out there. But if you live in a good district, please let us know, and we'll share that with our other parents. Debbie, tell us tell us some more about the books that you've uncovered.
Okay, well, I want to bring a very interesting point. This was interesting to me. I don't know how many parents are familiar with the Junie B. Jones books. Okay, Junie B. Jones are for your lower grades. They're a very, very simple book. Almost every one of the Junie B. Jones books starts out with, my name is Junie B. Jones. The B stands for Beatrice, except I don't like Beatrice. I just like B, and that's all. Okay? I was named after the month of Junie, because Junie is the month I was born in, of course. Now, why am I bringing that up? I think you'll see in a minute. Last week, I brought up a book called Girl to Girl by Julianne Peters, and this is a book, 10 different stories about different lesbians. You have a Butch. It's called Stone Cold Butch. You have the one that sent her cousin to the sex shop to buy a packer for her because she always wanted to be a boy. And the first page of that book, I read you the first of Junie B. Jones. The first of the Girl to Girl is she sits alone in art, senior seminar, lunch on the train. She always sits alone. If I was alone, I'd find something to do. Okay, that's the beginning of the book. Now, you know that Girl to Girl is 10 stories of lesbians. And you know that Junie B. Jones, and it's for upper grades, but Junie B. Jones is for lower grades. However, they are both written on a third grade 0-month reading level.
Wow.
You have to understand, if your child can read Junie B. Jones, your child could also read Girl to Girl.
That's my point, parents. Look at the grade level that this thing's written on.
And again, I believe that this is why the Common Core standards want to move away from the classics of literature that are of a higher reading level, that our children need to be reading not only because of the higher reading level, but because of the values and the morals and ethics that we can learn from reading the classics of literature. But they just want to give parents the false sense that their child is completely literate. And I know we have in our nation what the term is functional illiterate, where many adults are reading at the 4th and 5th grade reading levels because these kind of books are in our libraries that don't challenge our children to accelerate in their skills.
Yes.
All part of the agenda for keeping an uneducated population in order to control.
And not only uneducated, but amoral. In other words, you at home, the parent, you're teaching your children morals. You might be teaching them a godly background of this, but then they go to school and they see all of this, and they're getting all of this. It's completely undermining, again, parents' authority over their children.
Mm-hmm.
So it's part of the agenda. Understand, everything we're pointing out here is an agenda. There's a purpose behind it. It's not benign that they put this filth into the children's books and they're getting rid of the true literature that we used to have, classic literature, as Angela was saying. No, this is not just happenstance. It's by design. I'd like to know what sickos sit here and put this stuff together and think it's great. But when you have the Surgeon General of the United States, Jocelyn Elders, endorsing this kind of stuff, we're in trouble. Our nation and our children are in trouble. And that's why, again, Operation Jericho is here to offer you solutions. So be sure to visit us on our website. Anyway, go ahead, Debbie.
Well, let's remember that it isn't just sex in kids' books. It's not just Christian bashing. There are regular political agendas. But one that I want to deal with, I just read the sex scenes from Wide Awake by David Levithan, but there are other messages in that book, and I would like to read an excerpt from that.
Well, please do. I can't wait.
I can't believe there's going to be a gay Jewish president. As my mother said this, she looked at my father. They were shocked. I sat there and beamed. I think it was the Jesus freaks who were the happiest the next day at school. Stein's victory wouldn't have been possible without the Jesus revolution in the church. I want you to think about where our churches are today, and then hear what I'm saying as I continue. Mandy was wearing her Jesus is Love T-shirt, while Jana had a Love Thy Neighbor button on her bag right above the Stein for President sticker. Somewhere Jesus is smiling, Jana said. If Stein won the presidency, I would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance for the first time since elementary school. I bet that one brings a little connection there about standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and what our president's wife said. Okay, let me continue. Like most decent... Pardon
Debbie,
me?
tell the listeners what she said.
Well, she never wanted to say the Pledge of Allegiance because she wasn't proud of her country.
Exactly.
Until he got elected.
Right.
Okay, but as I continue, they use the word decence with a capital letter. So as I read, you'll get the context of what the author means. He says, like most decents, he wasn't taking defeat very well. You would have thought he'd be used to it now with all the changes that had happened over the past few years. With each one, the decents had sworn it meant the demise of civilization. So you know who he's talking about. But civilization did okay without the decents proclaiming what needed to be censored and what needed to be protected. They had been smart at first, labeling everyone who wasn't a decent as indecent. The initial reaction to that was to say, no, I'm not indecent, which immediately put us on the defensive. It was only when we could say, actually, I'm decent and you have no right to call me otherwise, that changes began. The rise of the Green States, the Jesus Revolution, the all-equal movement, Stein's idea of the great community, and now the election. Now the next passage. The decents didn't even call themselves the decents anymore. We had won back the word just as we had won back words like moral and right and compassionate in earlier years because words mattered. Winning the words was a good part of the battle, and we won them by defining them correctly. And then as the crowd cheered, I looked at Stein's husband, Ron, standing by his side. For the Jesus revolutionaries, the answer was clear. Jesus would not be out waging preventative wars. Jesus would not be withholding medicine from people who could not afford it, would not cast stones at people of races, sexual orientations, or genders other than his own, would not condone the failing, viperous, scandal-plagued hierarchy of some churches. Jesus would welcome everyone to his table. He would love them, and he would find peace.
Oh, my God, that's blasphemy.
Yes, the books are blasphemous, but they are swaying the children. It's line upon line, precept upon precept. And they get a few paragraphs from one book and a few from the next and a few from the next till once again we're back to where in the world did my child pick up an idea like that?
Yes, and unfortunately this is permeating our churches because you can't even get the pastors to stand. You know, it's amazing to me. We try to show these pastors what's going on with the children's books in these churches, and they'll go, oh, this is disgusting. We can't see this. We can't tell people about this. Are you kidding me? This is what your children are learning.
That's right. And they tie my hands behind my back. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We can pretend that the children aren't reading it because we're not going to look at it and say, yes, these are the ideas that they are picking up. What are we going to do about it?
Exactly.
Well, and it's very frustrating, Debbie, when we point these things out to our pastors, and they say, well, yeah, that's pretty bad, but I'm not going to preach from the pulpit about this.
Mm-hmm.
It's
or I might offend
astonishing.
somebody. Right. I might offend somebody. They might offend some. Excuse me. Are we not offended with the blasphemy against Jesus Christ? Are we not offended at the pornographic material being put upon our children? And you say, I might offend someone? Because,
right.
I have teachers, I have this, I have that, I have gays, I have all this in my congregation. Excuse me, what are you there for? If not to stand up and preach the word of God. And nowhere does God say to compromise. And we are selling our children out to the agenda of the world. There will be judgment for this upon this nation.
Yes.
Well, I just can't help but think that parents would be appreciative of somebody pointing out these things, because we're all busy. I understand that. I was a busy parent. I trusted my schools were doing the right thing, and I probably would have welcomed anybody pointing out to me that my child was being exposed to values that were contradictory to what I was trying to teach my children, but nobody did that, which is very unfortunate. And so parents will be grateful, pastors, if you would help point them into the understanding of what their children are being exposed to help them make an educated decision on whether to leave their children in the government-run schools or to pull them out in private Christian school or homeschool them. But when you leave your congregation of parents in the dark, where they don't have the information to make an educated decision, that is a huge disservice to your congregation, in my opinion. This is why they are there for worship and guidance.
Where else are they going to go for truth? They're supposed to be able to go to their pastors, their church leaders, etc., for truth, for clarification on the Word of God. And they go to them and they say, we don't want to get involved in that. That's politics. Excuse me? Oh, no, that's not, politically correct for us to preach from the pulpit or to speak about. And this is what's happened. Go ahead, Debbie.
There's a couple more reasons, Christina. First of all, I think you all can understand that when you talk about children's books, you couldn't have children in the congregation at the time. Okay? But the second thing is, even in the church, and, you look at all of the teacher sex crimes with children, and these are men and women. You have, even within the church, you have so many people who are addicted to porn. And when you talk about children's books, you're actually titillating them, so to speak.
Good point.
And so it's a very, very difficult subject to address. So meanwhile, while we're trying to figure out a way of how to do it, we're having, we've had generations since the 60s that have come up on all of these things. So we have adults that grew up with these books.
I was just going to say that, Debbie, that unfortunately a lot of the parents we expect to be shocked and concerned over this were raised on these themselves. So they're not shocked to them anymore. And there's a difference between the old school teacher and the new teacher. The new teacher has been indoctrinated. The old school teacher hasn't. And so they're not going to conform. They don't fit into this new mold. So they're going to get rid of them. And it's wow, what's happening to our society while we sit and I'm going to say it. We're so busy with our own personal lives, whether it's running the kid to soccer or here or there, whatever we're doing, we're not paying attention to their souls, to their minds. And this is the problem. We're not paying attention. And parents, we have got to stand up and pay attention, because the government is taking our children into an area where I'm sure you don't want your child to go. You're not teaching them morals at home to send them off to school to learn pornography.
Well, let's remember though that even homeschoolers, if the parents aren't watching, if they're just trusting of the librarians and the libraries and the reviews on Amazon or Accelerated Reader, those children are being exposed to these things too. And we have to be aware of that.
And my understanding, Debbie, is oftentimes the librarians, because it's the American Library Association, are they're instructed to guide the children to these books and to make them available to them. Is that correct? Yes,
they are readily available. They are taught that it is diversity, and they have to have diversity in the libraries. And that's what they use to justify buying all of these books. I would like to close with one passage from 1975.
Go ahead,
and
Debbie,
the reason I want to... Do I have time?
We're coming down to the end of the show, so go ahead and give a closing statement to everyone.
Okay, I just want to show how they redirected your indignation in this passage. This is a book from 1975 where a 5-year-old Suzu comes to the dinner table naked. This was an adopted little girl. While sitting on her mom's lap, Suzu puts her foot in her vagina. Now, I don't even know if something like that's possible, but now, what is that foot doing there, Mom said? That vagina says, "Get out, foot, you leave me alone." "No hair on Tookie," Suzu said. "On what?" said Mom. "Tookie," Suzu said. "That's my Tookie." I felt sort of embarrassed that this word for vagina, they use it, and the mom says, "Well, that's ridiculous. Don't teach her that kind of idiocy, Bernie. Teach her the regular names." And I said, "Do you see how they redirected you? And so the only thing that you were supposed to be indignant about is that she called it Tookie instead of vagina?"
Vagina, exactly.
Now, how many children have you ever had that do that same antic? None. There.
Again, it's the words, isn't it? Words matter.
Yes. Yes. And they know how they are channeling the children.
Yes, that's right.
So, with that, I'm sorry, parents, that this was such hard material to go over today. But it's a hard subject. I just want the parents to be ever mindful of what their children are reading today.
Yes, please.
Well, and also, Christina, I just want to remind parents that if they want to learn more about this topic, if they visit OperationJerichoProject.com, they will be able to click on the links at the top of the web page and learn more about what our children are reading. And Debbie's commentaries are featured there, as well as links to many of the books that she has pointed out. And this is a great resource for them to use to go to their local library and check out the books to see for themselves.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because, this show and all of our radio shows are also listed on the website, OperationJerichoProject.com. And they have their own tab, don't they, Angela?
Yeah, OJP Radio at the top of the web page is where you can find the past radio shows and be able to listen to broadcasts that you may have missed or you want to listen to again, to be able to write down some of the information or to share it with others that you feel need to hear this message. It's just very important that we keep educating all of our parents and all of the community activists that are concerned about government education because of Common Core. We need to help everybody understand it's not Common Core. It is so much more. And we're not going to fix this by passing legislation to withdraw from Common Core. We're probably going to only rescue our children from the system. It's going to be the only means to break the system, to establish parental control and that local authority of elected representation. So I do encourage everybody to visit our website, share the radio show, share our newsletter that is in the archives, and sign up. for the newsletter so that you can stay informed of the news stories that come out and everything that you need to know, and to seek out the alternatives to the government education. We have lots of resources there. It's because we don't want to leave you with just the problem. We want to give you the solutions as well. So I urge you to visit our website.
Oh, absolutely. And just know that, you're not going to save your child. You're not going to do anything by doing what, say, Glenn Beck's event suggested. Opt your kid out of the testing. Remember, it's not testing. It's assessing your child's psychological behavior to see where they fit and how much remediation they're going to have to conform. So we've got to really realize what we're up against. And the only alternative that we can come up with is to rescue the children and get them out of the government indoctrination system. Perhaps, it gives us something to start over with at a later date. And if you want to continue to, fight Common Core, which is really a waste of time at this point because the agenda is so entrenched and so well-funded, you're not going to stop it. That was one point Glenn Beck was right on. The rest of that I have to disagree with. Opting your children out of this assessing is not going to cripple Common Core. They'll just find another way around it, and you will win nothing, and your child will lose. So that's really where we're at. We have to rescue the children. We must get them out of this system, and really get them back to a classical education. Which again, we go back to our website, Alternatives to Government Education, Freedom Project Education, has a wonderful classical education program that you do online with teachers in a classroom. And it's so inexpensive, it's like $1,600 a year. You can't beat that. So there are alternatives, and that's what Operation Jericho Project is all about. We're about the solutions. We're going to tell you the problems, and we'll keep sharing them with you. But we're also going to direct you to solutions. We have got to get our children out of this indoctrination system to save them. So I can't encourage you all enough to go to our website, www.operationjerichoproject.com. Join us on Facebook at facebook.com/Operation Jericho Project. And share these. Post these on your Facebook pages. Take these radio links and share them with others. Get them out there on Facebook. Get these going viral so people can hear the truth. There are so many mixed messages out there. You've got a lot of anti-Common Core fighters that are pushing parents to charters. They're part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. Angela dealt with this at great depth in Georgia when she had to fight conservative, so-called conservative organizations that are telling her to sit down and shut up and let them handle the legislation. And in the meantime, what did we get, Angela? Nothing. So we got an opening to charter schools. So we've got to watch, do your homework, and understand that the only solution is to get your children out. And we thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next week. And we're going to have Reverend William Cook on, who's joining us, and we'll